The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might know me as the Grey Warder on Twitter or Discord. Welcome to the 4th episode of Podcast of the Dragon. Today I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite part of the Eye of the World, Rand and Matt's long walk to Camelin. I'm going to acknowledge where these chapters go wrong, and then I'm going to tell everyone who thinks they suck why they're wrong, to malign this beautiful series of moments between two friends. Moments that, if one of them could remember them, if his mind had not been obliterated by an evil cursed dagger that he stole from a murder city, he might not have been such an asshole when he found out that the other one could channel. A lot of the chapter-by-chapter Wheel of Time podcasts that I have listened to, especially it seems like the ones with first-time readers who are being guided along by someone else who has been through the series, have expressed boredom or frustration or exasperation for these 4 chapters with Rand and Matt on the road walking from Whitebridge to Camelin. And I don't really understand why, or at least I don't understand why anyone would find them boring. I'll grant that the way he does the 2 flashbacks is confusing. While one of them is effective, the other one doesn't make any sense, and because it takes thinking them through and rereading to see that one is a sensical and effective flashback and the other is not, for a first-time reader who is detail-oriented and concerned about timeline, the overall experience is likely a frustrating one. I'm not sure why he did the first flashback the way he did. Maybe he was trying to instill some tension or give the reader a sense of their paranoia as stress level midway through the journey. At the beginning of the 4 chapters, that's chapter 31, Play for Your Supper, he lets you kind of see and take a measure of what they're going through before he brings you back to Whitebridge and fills it in. Rand narrowed his eyes, watching the dust tail that rose ahead, 3 or 4 bends of the road away. Matt was already headed toward the wild hedgerow alongside the roadway. Its evergreen leaves and densely intermeshed branches would hide them as well as a stone wall if they could find a way through to the other side. The other side of the road was marked by the sparse brown skeletons of head-high bushes, and beyond was an open field for half a mile to the woods. It might have been part of a farm not too long abandoned, but it offered no quick hiding place. He tried to judge the speed of the dust tail and the wind. A sudden gust swirled dust up around him, obscuring everything. He blinked and adjusted the plain dark scarf across his nose and mouth. None too clean now, it made his face itch, but it kept him from inhaling dust with every breath. A farmer had given it to him, a long-faced man with grooves in his cheeks from worry. The problem with the first flashback is that it has no satisfactory resolution, which is why it makes no sense. When you have the type of flashbacks RJ uses in these 4 chapters, where a scene plays out and is then backfilled, you have to return to the original scene. Not only does that not happen with the first flashback, which I'll call the scarf flashback, the scene we're given to start out chapter 31 probably actually couldn't have occurred with the timeline the boys have and the way the events play out after 4 Kings. As far as I can recall, these 2 flashbacks, the scarf one and the later cart flashback at the beginning of chapter 33, The Dark Waits, are unique to the series. So I'm wondering if they were kind of a failed experiment. Flashbacks in future books are much more straightforward. They're kind of a simple filling in of events to give you background to the scene that is currently happening, usually in italics, rather than these more theatrical, mysterious scenes where you drop in and it's like, Rand's in the back of a cart? Why? What do you mean he's sick? What happened? I'm going to give a quick recap of the trip up to the point that they reach 4 Kings. I found this really great map of Eastern Andor from Whitebridge to Camelin that I'm hoping is canon and accurate. I'll post it in the Podcast of the Dragon channel of the Watt Trivia and Games Discord. It shows all the mentioned villages and towns, and the first village we actually have a name for is Arian. and that village is 3/5 of the way to Camelin. Aryan is the first town that they perform in. They juggle and play the flute there. Up until then, they are sleeping in haystacks and under bushes. They're stealing food and doing chores for food and beds at farms. They go and approach them trying to get work. If Matt doesn't fuck it up by glaring suspiciously at farmers and getting the dogs set on them. In the book, it's 5 days from Four Kings to Camelin. Looking at the map, it's a little more distance-wise from Aryan to Four Kings, so I'll say it takes 6 or 7 days to travel that. So, also looking at the map and getting the measure of it, it probably took, say, 17 days to get from Whitebridge to Aryan. I'm throwing an extra couple of days in there to account for daylight hours that the boys would have spent working for food. So all told, the trip to Camelin probably took them nearly a month. Beyond the fact that they spend a lot of the journey up to the point that they hit Aryan hungry and deprived of general comforts, and with Matt getting increasingly suspicious of strangers, before Four Kings their trip is pretty uneventful. Beyond being frightened and stressed and dealing with hostility, getting chased off, having dogs set on them and stuff, their problems are with people. They don't deal with any fades. They don't have any dark friends. The last farm they do work at is Elsa Grinwell's. So they work in her father's barn, they eat dinner with the family, and then they entertain the family with juggling and with Rand playing the flute as a reward, especially because the Grinwells have a whole bunch of little kids, and Matt relaxes around kids and stops being such an asshole. Then because Elsa's drooling all over Rand and wanting to get up on his dick, and he's really nervous about it, and his mom kind of gives him her mom kind of gives him a flat-eyed stare when she's all like, "You play so beautifully, I've never heard anything so beautiful." He's freaked out because if he gets accused of anything, he's fucked. So he keeps playing songs. He doesn't know what else to do. And they keep the family up really late, just playing and entertaining. And when Elsa's dad is sort of like, "Damn, that was really awesome. I could totally have more work for you in the morning," her mom is like, "Nah, fam, nah. They gotta fuck off down the road. They'll have to walk all day if they want to try their luck playing at the inn." And so that idea gives them the idea that they'll start performing, and once they do that, they get several days of sleeping in beds and eating good food, and depending on if there are multiple inns in a village and the innkeepers bid for their services, they get money sometimes, and then they get to Four Kings, and everything goes to hell. So in the first of these 4 chapters, you get a rundown of everything that happened during the first 80% of their journey, when things are mostly chill. They're hungry, they're scared, they're hiding, Matt's an asshole, they're stealing food sometimes, they're working at farms, Elsa's acting like a stalker, but the bulk of these chapters are about the 5 days from the night in Four Kings until they get to Camelin. There's a lot packed into them, and they're great, not just because they have some good action and some good tension, but because of what goes on between Rand and Matt, and the testament to their friendship, both touching and tragic. One of the things I've always liked best about these chapters is the kind of person that Rand is in them. It's true eye of the world Rand in his best essence, where he shows great leadership and problem-solving skills. He shows incredible determination. It's Rand at his most heartbreaking. Rand before he realizes that all of the problems that he's running from, all of the answers he's looking to, they're kind of a moot point, because in the long run, it's all been inside him, to the point where he'll reflect on it in The Great Hunt and think, "I think I was happy even running for my life," back before he knew he could channel. These chapters portray him in a wonderful way, with his kindness and his moral fiber and his fundamental decency all on display. It shows how he is so very resistant to the dagger. He is able to keep Matt hopeful, sometimes keep him cheerful, sometimes get his sense of humor working. He's able to stop Matt from killing or trying to kill people at least 3 times. You learn that his Taviran tugging works on people all over the course of the trip. You find out later that he has influenced a number of people with it. You know that Elsik Rinwell, after he leaves the farm, she gets the idea that she wants to be an Aes Sedai, and she runs off to Tar Valon. You find out that Almond Bunt, who is the farmer who gives them the ride, the last leg of their trip to Camelin, he stays after the riots start. When Rand and crew leave and they go to Faldara, there are riots after, because Rand always leaves riots in his wake, and Almond Bunt stays and he fights for Morghese. I always wonder what his words do for Albert Mole, who is the farmer who gives them the scarves they're wearing in the first flashback. Mole feels like a piece of shit because the boys are soaking wet, and he feels like he should be giving them somewhere to dry off, but he is just too paranoid of strangers and just can't bring himself to let his guard down enough to let these boys come to his house. And he tells Rand that if he were a good person, he would let them come. And Rand is just sort of like, you are a good person. You're the best man that I have met in days. And Mole looks so gratified when he leaves, and then he is out of the story for good. And I always wonder, where did he go from there, and what did Rand's kind and encouraging words do for him? Because they can't have done nothing. The dagger serves multiple purposes beyond just causing problems and mayhem and cursed despair. It may have saved Matt's life, and not just because it made him so suspicious that when he's taking care of a sick Rand in a stable and a dark friend comes in under the guise of goodwill saying, "Oh, I have skill, I'll check on him," he's ready for what should have been a shockingly speedy dagger thrust. In Crown of Swords, when he recognizes the dark friend, Millie Skane / Lady Shiane, at the Circuit of Heaven, the racetrack in Ibu Dar, and the vague memory of the scene comes up, and he remembers his thought processes of it, and how incredibly suspicious of it. You know, he remembers how he was just waiting for her to do something. But that's not the only reason that it saved his life. It saved his life in the sense that although it made him more confrontational, it also made him more cautious. His paranoia made him guard his tongue. Before he had the dagger, Matt was always the one who ran his mouth. He never thought before he spoke. He was never close with information. He just blah, 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 and never thought about it. So despite everything wrong with it, the Shatter Logoth dagger really did have some preserving powers in it. Kitty, you really need to not crawl on my shoulder right now. If Matt hadn't picked it up, he probably would have died from his own stupidity. Outside of that, the dagger was brilliant as a device for breathing room for a writer. Robert Jordan had this huge piece of epic fantasy with several main characters that he had to develop. And only having to develop Rand and Perrin in the first book with a little bit of Nynaeve, and then Rand and Egwene in the second book with a little more of Perrin and a bit of Nynaeve, really was nice. Like, it gave him some time, and because of the dagger and its obliteration of Matt's mind, he doesn't have to do any character development of him until book 3. So RJ gets to spend 2 books developing 3 of his 4 main characters. Because while Nynaeve is sort of a main character, she's not totally. The Watt Wiki has a statistical breakdown of all of the point of views / page time / percentage of all of the characters throughout the series, and Rand has 20% of the page time. Egwene and Perrin each get 12%. Matt has 11%. Nynaeve only gets 6% of the story. Even Elaine has more than that at 8%. You don't really notice because Nynaeve has such a gigantic personality that it seems like she gets a lot more of the story than she does. But the main characters of the story are really Rand, Mat, Perrin, and Egwene. So he gets to save Mat for book 3 when his personality is this huge reveal. Like, whoa, his friends don't understand him at all. This asshole has all the building blocks to be a truly upstanding person, even though before he submits to the will of the pattern, he's still a bit of a douche. I don't think I really considered all of that when I was first reading it. I just wasn't enough of a critical reader yet, and I was too caught up in just taking it at face value and really loving the different points of view, and not really thinking about what it all meant. And honestly, not really being fond of Mat, because his friends' point of views don't paint a flattering picture of him. Their perception of him seems to be of an immature douchebag who isn't a very good friend, and when you see him through their eyes, people don't like him. It's rare to find someone who actually likes him when you see him through his friend's eyes. In the 3rd book, he becomes likable because you finally see his point of view. Before, you're seeing him through others' eyes and you don't like him, which makes you wonder, do any of his friends like him? It's almost like Rand is fond of Mat, and Mat is his bestie, but Rand has a limited friend pool, and Mat has a lot of shortcomings. He's not a terrific friend, but in a place like the Two Rivers, you have a lot fewer people to pick from, and you have to be more forgiving. As opposed to someone like me, I live in an urban environment, and I'm also kind of antisocial, and I'm willing to not put up with people who are exhausting or assholes or like talking into a void or just generally full of bullshit. I'd rather be alone. So Rand puts up with endless amounts of Mat's bullshit because he just doesn't have a lot of people to choose from. But in fairness, when I was his age, I had friends who were definitely exhausting and did not give me the reciprocity that I deserved, and I put up with their bullshit too. So maybe it's just an age thing. While Rand is resistant to the effects of the dagger, it still weighs on his thoughts. He has negative self-talk, like that's one of his personality traits, but he is determinedly positive, particularly over the course of this journey. In his mind, they will get to Caemlyn, the others are alive, he refuses to not believe things will be okay. So I think the negative, doubtful thoughts that come to him are influenced by the dagger, such as when they hit the first village after Whitebridge. It was coming on evening as they went through the village, and he felt a pang of homesickness as lights appeared in the windows. No matter what it looks like, a small voice whispered in his mind, it isn't really home. Even if you go into one of those houses, Tam won't be there. If he was, could you look him in the face? You know now, don't you? Except for little things like where you come from and who you are. No fever dreams. He hunched his shoulders against taunting laughter inside his head. You might as well stop, the voice snickered. One place is as good as another when you aren't from anywhere, and the Dark One has you marked. They get through the other side of that first village, and they find a spot under some bushes, and they just drink a bunch of water to fill their stomachs because they don't have any food. And they try to go to sleep, and it says, he did not dream that he could remember, but he did not sleep well. You'll never see home again. And then later on, when they're in Four Kings, and he's considering the wisdom of continuing to wear the heron-marked sword because it is very remarkable, and he knows it's a way for him to be recognized and tracked. It says, in any case, he was reluctant to stop wearing it. Tam had given it to him, his father. As long as he wore the sword, there was still some connection between Tam and him, a thread that gave him the right to still call Tam father. Too late now, he thought. He was not sure what he meant, but he was sure it was true. Too late. Before Four Kings, things are pretty uneventful. They're stressed, they're really fearful, but nothing particularly happens. Most of their problems are of Matt's making. His paranoia and his subsequent behavior and acting like an asshole, making other people uncomfortable. He causes a lot of problems for them. When they get to Four Kings, they don't want to sleep out in this thunderstorm, but the only inn available for them to play in is this nasty, sketchy one with an ominously skinny innkeeper, Samuel Hake. Early into it, Hake and his bouncers make it pretty clear that they intend to rob them. But they don't want to leave because they're hungry and they want to sleep somewhere dry. And into it, they kind of realize that they're trapped because they know that the drunk patrons will basically let the innkeeper know if they leave the dais. So it's kind of going to be hard for them to effect an escape, and they realize that they're just going to have to wait until everybody goes to sleep. And then their first dark friend shows up, because they don't know about Pat and Fane. When they meet up with Moraine again, she tells them, when she learns about the dagger, that its evil might be enough to draw exceptionally committed dark friends who are very deep in evil, and that certainly seems to be the case for the dark friend from Whitebridge, Howell Goad. He came in well after dark, shaking the rain off his cloak as he looked around, a twist of distaste on his mouth. He scanned the room once, already turning to go, then suddenly gave a start at nothing Rand could see and sat down at a table Jack and Strom had just emptied. So their first creepy dark friend comes in. He's super out of place. It's a much rougher clientele that normally frequents the place. There are no private dining rooms for people like him. But he makes everyone uncomfortable. Nobody wants to sit with him. All they gotta do is look at him and be like, ugh. And he just sits there and smiles at them. And he's super gross. When it's time for them to go to bed, Samuel Hake shows them to the shitty storeroom that was the only place he'd give them to sleep. Rand refuses to let the men get behind them. He insists that they go first, and his ability to stand, as Gareth Bryn says later on, as if the sword belongs at his waist, makes them uncertain. Hake hesitates about jumping them because he's not sure if Rand can use the sword or not, and he doesn't know if he could fuck them up. And so he decides that he and his bouncers will come back after the boys are asleep to presumably rob them and murder them. He didn't even give them beds, murder them on their pallets. The whole journey from Whitebridge to Camelin was a lesson in assertiveness training for Rand. Despite his inherent Two Rivers stubbornness and his willingness to question Moraine and kind of constantly push back against her control, Eye of the World Rand is as a rule pretty passive. He's kind of a daddy's boy. I won't say he's immature for his age and his time, but he's definitely not mature. And while he grows tremendously over the course of the journey, he's at the start of it. One of the first-time reader podcasts that I was talking about is called The Wheel Reads, and in their first episode, one of the guys calls him a wimp. And I don't know if that's 100% fair, but it's not totally wrong. He's not somebody that you would trust to be able to make his needs known and get what needed to be done. But when he has to take leadership during the journey and take action among far less friendly people than he's used to, he rises to the occasion. He reaches out and approaches people to see if they have chores to barter for food and beds, even though he knows that there's a chance that they're going to be hostile to him or even fucking chase them away or send dogs to chase them. He pitches their skills to innkeepers and bargains for the terms of their services. When Hake tells them that they can have pallets in an old storeroom, Rand says, okay, they'll do if they're clean and there are enough clean blankets. And he's also like, we'll eat 2 hours after full dark and no later. Like, he's learned to be very firm and insistent that he will get what's fair. And, he's learned to stand up. Rand and Matt decide there's no way they're waiting for Hake to come back. So they dig around the room. They know that either Jack or Strom is waiting at the end of the hall. So Rand finds some splitting wedges that he manages to get stuck under the door. And they're going to go out the window, but they see that it has bars on it. They find a crowbar, and they start timing their heaves to get the bars off the window to the thunder peals. And they see it's got like dozens of nails nailing it shut. They manage to get it like a finger's width open. They're not doing so great at it. At this point, they hear someone knocking on their door, and they think it's Hake, so they're like, yo, fuck off, we're trying to sleep. But it's Howl Goad instead, and he has drugged Hake, Jack, and Strom, and he's got a whole bunch of dudes both out in the hall with him and outside the window. He talks to the boys, and he tells them what he senses about them. He knows that he's looking for someone, but he doesn't have clear communication. Whatever is being passed along the Dark Friend phone tree before Four Kings is garbage. After this night, Balsamon talks to Goad in either Tel Iron Riyadh or in a Dream Shard. It's never made very clear. I kind of feel like Jordan had not yet ironed out all the rules of the way the world of dreams worked, or just dreams in general, because Balsamon like zaps Goad in one of Rand's dreams, and it's not super clear. But regardless, Balsamon gets the information that he needs from Goad, and afterwards there are Dark Friends galore dogging Rand and Matt up until the point that they hit Camelin. So, Goad's outside their door knocking. They say, go away, Hake, and he says, I fear you mistake me. The voice was so sleek and full of itself that it named its owner, Howl Goad. Master Hake and his minions will not trouble us. They sleep soundly, and in the morning they will only be able to wonder where you vanished to. Let me in, my young friends. We must talk. We don't have anything to talk to you about, Matt said. Go away and let us sleep. Goat's chuckle was nasty. Of course we have things to talk about. You know that as well as I. I saw it in your eyes. I know what you are, perhaps better than you do. I can feel it coming from you in waves. So the dagger is coming off of Matt, and Hake can sense it, even if he's not sure what it is. And he's going to take them whether they like it or not. So he gives the order to bash the door down, and Rand is thinking that they have to find a way out, because Matt's at the point of, well, if we don't have any choice, and Rand gives him an are you fucking crazy look, and Matt's like, we could say yes and then get away later. Blood and ashes, Rand, there's no way out. The words seemed to drift to Rand through wool stuffed in his ears. No way out. Thunder muttered overhead and was drowned in a slash of lightning. Have to find a way out. Goad called to them, demanding, appealing. The door slid another inch toward being open. A way out. Light filled the room, flooding vision. The air roared and burned. Rand felt himself picked up and dashed against the wall. So Rand unconsciously calls lightning. Oops. I've heard people that don't like these chapters complain that they are an endless string of villages and dark friends. They hit a village, there's a dark friend. They hit another village, there's a dark friend. And while that's true over the course of a couple of days, it's really an exaggeration. And beyond that, it does not take into account what's really important about these chapters, which is all of the heartbreaking moments of loyalty and tenderness between Rand and Matt that happen while they're traveling. These instances of their friendship are so powerful that it takes until the dagger has almost entirely consumed Matt before he turns on Rand. He is suspicious of everyone else. By the time they get to the Queen's Blessing, Rand is the only one he'll take food from. He's bringing him all his meals. I don't know if he's emptying his chamber pot. He wasn't leaving the room, though, and he was probably sketch enough that the maids didn't want to go near him. Maybe they were pushing it out into the hall. Jordan wasn't really talking about chamber pots at that point in the series. But whatever was happening, Rand was taking really good care of Matt. When he channeled the lightning to get them out of the storeroom, Rand didn't know what had happened. Matt had to tell him, yo, there was lightning, and I was looking right at it, and he couldn't see after that, so Rand had to grab him by the hand. Let's go while we can, Rand said. Hastily helping separate their belongings from the rubble, he grabbed Matt's arm and half-pulled, half-guided his friend through the gaping hole into the night. Matt clutched his arm, stumbling beside him with his head pushed forward in an effort to see. And further along into the next chapter, after the flashback of Rand's channeling sickness, where he's riding in the back of Hyam Kinch's cart, when it goes back to the beginning, or it goes back to Four Kings when they're fleeing, it says, Matt was all but blind in the dark, squinting painfully at the sharp flashes that made trees stand out starkly for an instant. Rand led him by the hand, but Matt still felt out each step uncertainly. Worry creased Rand's forehead. If Matt did not regain his sight, they would be slowed to a crawl. They would never get away. Matt seemed to sense his thought. Despite the hood of his cloak, the rain had plastered Matt's hair across his face. Rand, he said, you won't leave me, will you? If I can't keep up? His voice quavered. I won't leave you. Rand tightened his grip on his friend's hand. I won't leave you no matter what. This is kind of the all about the man next to you, or you never leave a man behind credo that you get among soldiers. And I can see RJ imagining what he would have done faced with the same thing. It shows the quality of Rand, the type of person that he is. He's not yet at the point of understanding what it is to not just be a soldier, but to be a leader of soldiers, where sometimes you do have to leave people behind and make terrible choices and sacrifices to further a mission. He still has the luxury of being an individual person who can make an individual choice not to leave his friend behind, to hunker down and just say, we'll both stay here because you can't go on, and if we both die, that's okay. He doesn't have to be the Dragon Reborn yet and be more important than everything else. For fear of Matt's safety, they stop for the night because Rand's afraid he'll break a leg. So they go and they find some bushes to shelter under. They tried to arrange their cloaks to make a little tent over the branches. It was far too late to think of staying dry, but just stopping the incessant pelting of the raindrops would be something. They crouched against each other to share what little body warmth was left to them. Dripping wet as they were, and more drips coming through the cloaks, they shivered themselves into sleep. So Rand has a terrible dream where he's back in the Dancing Cartman, and Howl Goat is there all burned up, Baalzamon is there, and gives Goat his terrible reward, and basically lets Rand know, he found you for me, and they have nothing but trouble from Darkrens from there on, and Baalzamon throws a flame ball into Rand's face, and he wakes up feeling sunburned, and says suddenly he realized Matt was twisting and moaning in his sleep. He shook him, and Matt came awake with a whimper. My eyes! Oh, light, my eyes! He took my eyes! Rand held him close, cradling him against his chest as if he were a baby. You're all right, Matt. You're all right. He can't hurt us. We won't let him. He could feel Matt shaking, sobbing into his coat. He can't hurt us, he whispered, and wished he believed it. They don't go back to sleep. Once the sun is up, they leave and they start walking along the Camelin Road. They're still soaking wet, and Rand is leading Matt by the hand. this vision of them so scared and desperate, basically holding hands. Matt's blind. It's really sad. They've been through some fucked up shit. What happened with Tom and Whitebridge was horrible, and Shatter Logoth was even worse, but they had been doing okay. Things had actually been pretty good for a while. They were eating good food, they were traveling the whole day, all their daylight hours, and then being able to just play music and juggle and get food and beds in inns, and things were decent. And then everything went to shit at Four Kings, and having Matt lose his sight, even for the short amount of time it happened, left them feeling incredibly vulnerable. Then they have their first Balsam on Nightmare in a long time, and having the dreams come back is fucked up. I don't know why RJ was so interested in dreams. Maybe he was a vivid dreamer. Maybe he had a lot of nightmares. Nightmares can accompany trauma, but I don't know how traumatic his war experiences were. Some people go through combat and come out okay. Some people deal with trauma relatively well. But maybe his dreams were powerful and he just decided to make use of them. These couple of days where Rand has to lead Matt by the hand, Matt is not only mentally fragile because of the dagger, he's physically vulnerable and terrified. And Rand, who has been the source of strength all along, where Matt would probably have stopped and given up because he is heart and soul breaking down and everything falling apart for him, Rand is refusing to give up. He's purely determined because one of them has to be strong, and it's him. And Rand just carries him along. He holds him by the hand when he wakes up from a terrible dream and he's totally distraught. Rand's instinct is just to cradle him and rock him in the bushes in the pouring rain, because his essence is truly loving and kind, and it's in his purest nature to soothe and heal. And that's tragic in its own way, because if you're rereading and you see this, you know what's going to happen to Rand, the kind of mental and emotional gauntlet he's going to run, and knowing the descent his personality is going to take is heartbreaking, because this person who hugs and rocks his friend is at the root of it. This is the person who's inside of the person who decides that he has to be ice and steel. Four Kings is 5 days out from Camelin. They leave it in the middle of the night, and they walk for an hour before Rand is concerned that Matt'll break a leg, and they spend the rest of the night under the bushes. They leave in the morning, and they walk for most of the day, and in the late afternoon they get a ride in the hay wain of Albert Mull, the man who gives them the scarves that they're wearing during the flashback at the beginning of chapter 31. The scarves that cause a continuity issue, because there is no place in the remaining journey between there and Camelin for them to be checking dust tails and hiding from merchant trains. It rained so hard that for a couple of days at least there probably wasn't going to be any dust at all, and for the rest of the time there isn't going to be any chance for them to hide between the amount of traffic that there will be on the road and the number of rides that they get. So that flashback is a fail. Albert Mull lets them off, and he feels really guilty because they're still wet and it's cold out. But he's a family man, and he's concerned about his family, and he just can't risk letting them come and stay. So he gives them the scarves, and Rand tells him it's okay, you are a good man. Being a 21st century American, it's a lot easier to relate to Albert Mull than it is for me to relate to someone who would be cool with a stranger coming up to your house and being like, yo, can I do some chores, and then you feed me and let me sleep in one of your beds. That's completely alien to me. It would be hard enough just to let somebody ride on my cart. I can much more identify with Mull's sense of caution that than with someone who would actually let strangers come to their house and work. Rand is concerned they'll die if they stay out that night because it's really cold and it's getting windy and colder and they're still wet. They have a store of emergency money, so he leads Mat on by the hand and they keep walking until they get to the next village, which happens to be Market Sharon, and they get a room and food at an inn and stay the night. In the morning, Mat can actually see a decent bit better. His vision is still impaired and things are blurry and it's still light sensitive, but it's much improved. Rand decides to spend a bit more of their very small amount of leftover money on some milk and bread, and they are in the common room eating breakfast when they are approached by Pater the Dark Friend, who is the boy who approaches Morghese in Book 6 when she is trapped in the Fortress of the Light and tells her that he and his Uncle Jen have a plan to sneak her out, but they all end up getting hanged instead. Rand is concerned that Pater will notice that Mat is visually impaired. The episode that I did on Shatter, Logoth, and trauma, I was talking about one of Rand's early traumas being that of seeing a crippled sheep separated by wolves and then swarmed on and killed. And I couldn't remember which book that he thinks about it in, and it was this one, in this scene. He's concerned that the Dark Friends will basically discover that Mat is a crippled sheep, so he distracts Pater so that Mat can kind of make a straight line for the door. They start to walk away, Pater touches Rand, and Rand turns around and punches him in the face and breaks his nose. And Pater doesn't like that, because why would you? And stupidly yells at them, hey, the Dark One's gonna fuck you up. And the old man, who is sweeping out the inn in Market Sharon, is shocked. The boys haul ass and get out of there, though not nearly as fast as Pater does, and they're out on the road walking. They get 6 short rides that day, and RJ kind of shows us about how rumors work. They get picked up by a guy who's laughing his ass off about, hey, did you hear about the Dark Friends in Market Sharon? Ha ha ha. Yeah, for sure, right, there'd be Dark Friends there. They get a wheelwright who wants to call the White Cloaks because he's like, I totally saw the Dark Friends and they're horrible and evil. And RJ uses rumors a lot to finish up later books. He'll have a real short chapter at the end when great events happen, like at the end of Lord of Chaos when the Aes Sedai kneel to Rand. The story ends and there's a whole bunch of different rumors of what actually happened at Dumai's Wells, and he just kind of shows how stories travel. So this is kind of a small taste of that. They get to the next village, which you never get a name of. They don't have enough money, but Mat figures he can see well enough to juggle, so they decide to perform. They're negotiating with the innkeeper, who is happy enough to have someone to distract all the fucking idiots who are filling his common room arguing about whether or not Logain is the false dragon or a real dragon, because now there are a lot of people on the road to Caemlyn. Then Rand has his reaction to his channeling in Four Kings and he gets sick. So he's zoned out to the point where he doesn't even hear what's going on. It's all like, mah, 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 mah. But Mat is arguing with the innkeeper, and then suddenly Mat took his arm, pulling him to his feet. All of their things, saddlebags, blanket rolls, Tom's bundled cloak, and instrument cases hung from Mat's shoulders with his bow. The innkeeper was watching them, wiping his face anxiously. Weaving, more than half supported by Mat, Rand let his friend steer him toward the back door. Sorry, Mat, he managed. He could not stop his teeth from chattering. Must have been the rain. One more night out won't hurt, I guess. Twilight darkened the sky, spotted by a handful of stars. Not a bit of it, Mat said. He was trying to sound cheerful, but Rand could hear the hidden worry. He was scared the other folk would find out there was somebody sick in his inn. I told him if he kicked us out, I'd take you into the common room. That'd empty half his rooms in 10 minutes. For all his talk about fools, he doesn't want that. Then where? Here, Mat said, pulling open the stable door with a loud creak of hinges. Maybe it's just Matt's personality, or maybe it's the dagger making him not give a fuck, but he is not above blackmailing the innkeeper for a place to stay and for food. He gets sausages, bread, cheese, and water out of him. For all that Rand has been the source of strength and motivation to keep going during this whole trip, when the shit hits the fan and Rand gets sick, Matt steps up his game. He takes such good care of him. He is super sweet and kind, which is not, neither of those things are things that you would ever think Matt could be. The dagger is really chewing away at all of the core of what he is, but there is this central part of him, a pure part that has been friends with Rand for years, a friendship that, despite the dagger, has been strengthening this whole time, and their trauma bond has been built upon and is more and more powerful, and the fact that he's been needing Rand because Rand has been their force and strength and impetus and hope, because Rand has provided hope. Matt probably wouldn't have been good at hoping even without the dagger because everything was just weighing on him. But with the dagger, it's impossible. But despite always leaning on Rand, Matt is able to rise to the occasion. He made a bed at the back of the stable and got Rand onto it. Matt covered him with both their cloaks, but Rand pushed them off almost immediately. "Hot," he murmured. Vaguely he knew that he had been cold only a moment before, but now he felt as if he were in an oven. He tugged at his collar, tossing his head. "Hot." He felt Matt's hand on his forehead. "I'll be right back," Matt said, and disappeared. And a little later, the chills came once more, and then the fever, to be replaced by the chills and the fever again. Matt covered him when he shook and fed him water when he complained of thirst. Matt, with what is almost the last of his decency and his capacity for goodwill and kindness and just maybe even love, takes really good care of Rand. And when Rand is having fever dreams, he sees a whole bunch of his friends and Moraine and Lan, and he's just having all these fucked up dreams. But the worst was Tam. Tam stood over him, frowning and shaking his head, and said not a word. "You have to tell me," Rand begged him. "Who am I? Tell me, please. Who am I? Who am I?" he shouted. "Easy, Rand." For a moment he thought it was Tam answering, but then he saw that Tam was gone. Matt bent over him, holding a cup of water to his lips. "Just rest easy. You're Rand al'Thor, that's who you are, with the ugliest face and the thickest head in the 2 rivers. Hey, you're sweating. The fever's broken." "Rand al'Thor?" Rand whispered. Matt nodded, and there was something so comforting in it that Rand drifted off to sleep without even touching the water. Later on, Lady Shiane/Millie Skane comes in. On the pretense of checking Rand, she tries to stab Matt, and as they're trying to decide what to do with her, the woman did not move from her sprawl as she watched Matt slowly turn toward her. She watched him as if wondering what he would do next, but Rand saw the sudden tightening of Matt's eyes, the tightening of his hand on the dagger. "Matt, no! She tried to kill me, Rand. She'd have killed you, too. She's a dark friend." Matt spat the word. "But we're not," Rand said. The woman gasped as if she had just realized what Matt intended. "We are not, Matt." Matt, even in the midst of all of this, is able to hear Rand, and despite the dagger, feels Rand's influence weighing on him and encouraging him to be good. So Rand keeps Matt from killing Millie Skane, which, considering the harm she goes on to do, it would probably have been better if he hadn't. But they're at a stage of their innocence where, had Matt killed her, it would have been too damaging to Rand to see that, and so it's probably for the best. Even so, the dragon ends up being traumatized enough without seeing a woman's throat cut in front of him by his best friend while he's still basically a boy. They lock her in the tack room instead, but they don't get very far along the road after they leave the village because Rand collapses. And it's a problem because this kind of a, disability or handicap, unlike Matt's being stricken blind by the lightning, can't be one of those things where Matt could be like a seeing eye Matt. He can't lead Rand along by the hand. I wonder sometimes if the influence of the dagger, and because Matt just is not as good a friend as Rand, had Rand not been able to keep up, would Matt have stayed with him? But we're not faced with that worry because Hyam Kinch shows up. And he's like, just have your friend get in the back. If he's going to be sick again, it's best he's sick on the straw. And so that's where that flashback ends up being an effective one, because that's where you are at the beginning of chapter 33, The Dark Waits. So it actually returns to that scene, and it was a good way to do the flashback. He's recovering from the channeling sickness. At the time, you don't know why he's sick, but it gives you a lead-in, and then it takes you back to Four Kings. Kinch gives them a pretty long ride, and he invites them to stay, and of course Matt fucks it up. He is an asshole to him, and Kinch is like, suit yourselves, and drives away. He told them that if they walk for the rest of the afternoon, they'll get to Carysford by dark, but it actually takes them longer, and Matt is complaining and being like, when are we going to stop? When are we going to stop? And Rand insists on 1 more mile. He wants to get through the village. So they cross a bridge and they get through to the other side, and then they decide to sleep in a haystack. Caring for Rand in the barn seemed to use up all of Matt's empathy and hope. He doesn't hit total bottom until Rand is leading the other Emmons Fielders up the stairs in the Queen's Blessing to come and see them, and he's like utterly savage and just, how do I know you're who you say you are? But he's on the final downward slide, and when they're in the haystack, he's just, I think we're the last ones left, Rand. He sounded frightened. Whatever it's all about, it's just us two now. Just us. Rand shook his head. He knew Matt could not see in the darkness, but it was more for himself than Matt anyway. Go to sleep, Matt, he said tiredly, but he lay awake for a long time himself before sleep came. Just us. In the morning they wake up and they crawl out of the haystack and they head out toward the road, and it's filled with people. All of these, for lack of a better word, pilgrims who are on the way to Camelin to see the false dragon, and all of these merchants and farmers and all these other people who are pissed off that there are all of these pedestrians blocking the road, which I sympathize. I hate it when there are parades. This is the only day from when they got the scarves that the scene that begins the flashback in chapter 31 could have happened, and it could not have happened because there's never enough clear space on the road for them to ever have been able to hide, and so it doesn't make any sense for them to have hid, so it could not have happened. Rand has to believe that the others are alive and that Moraine will fix everything, because he doesn't want to be in charge anymore. He just keeps thinking, we've got to get to Camelin, because he's over this. They walk the rest of the day, they keep going into the night. Other people going to see the false dragon, they leave the road and they're going to sleep in hedges and haystacks. Anybody who's got money goes into the inns, and they make the last village, and there's a Fade there talking to the innkeeper. So the Fades have gotten clever, and they're now saying the 2 boys that they are looking for have stolen a heron-marked sword. It also happens that Almon Bunt is there with his cart, and he's getting ready to go to Camelin because he wants to see the false dragon too. And he's watching the innkeeper, who he does not like, and he doesn't like the look of the Fade either. And after the Fade fucks off, Bunt starts to kind of make fun of him or poke at him a little bit especially when the innkeeper talks about how his friend is looking for these boys who stole a sword, and how there's like 100 gold marks or 100 gold crowns for the boys, but he wants them both. And Almond Bunt's like, wow, what's he gonna pay for the sword he wants so much? Rand takes a chance and is like, yo, I hear you're going to Camelin. And Bunt's like, yeah, wanna ride? Once they get to Camelin, Matt is super insistent that everybody's dead. He's really frustrating Rand. After Bunt drives away and leaves, then Matt can't even handle it because it's so noisy. He's just like, what the fuck are we supposed to do? And Rand just says, Tom said to find an inn called the Queen's Blessing. We'll go there first. How? We can't afford one meal between the two of us. At least it's a place to start. Tom thought we could find help there. I can't. Rand, they're everywhere. Matt dropped his eyes to the paving stones and seemed to shrink in on himself, trying to pull away from the people that were all around them. Wherever we go, they're right behind us, or they're waiting for us. They'll be at the Queen's Blessing, too. I can't. Nothing's going to stop a fade. Rand grabbed Matt's collar in a fist that he was trying hard to keep from trembling. He needed Matt. Maybe the others were alive. Like, please. But right then and there, it was just Matt and him. The thought of going on alone. He swallowed hard, tasting bile. Rand is in a final stage of innocence. A whole bunch of bad stuff has happened, and he's done a good job of standing up, taking responsibility, doing what has to be done. But all along, it's not just reach Camelin so he can find the others and know that they're alive, know that Egwene's alive. He wants to find Moraine. For all that he was mistrustful of Moraine and not really liking Moraine, he's like, this bitch is controlling my life, she's making all my choices. After Shatter Logoth, he missed her, and he wanted her. When they wake up in the morning in Market Sharon, and he's actually feeling pretty decent about everything, says Rand did feel good. They were a day away from Four Kings, and none of Gode's men had showed up. A day closer to Camelin, where Moraine would be waiting for them. She would. No more worrying about Dark Friends once they were back with the Aes Sedai and the Border. It was strange to be looking forward so much to being with an Aes Sedai. Light, when I see Moraine again, I'll kiss her. He laughed at the thought. He is so looking forward to an end of responsibility, and it's sad. He gets this narrow window of time when he is so excited to see the others, and then they find out about the Eye of the World, and they have to travel the ways and go to the flight, and then he learns that he can channel. He gets maybe, I don't know, 3 days from the time that he meets up with everyone in Camelin. 4 days tops before he finds out that he can channel. So this momentary relief. And it's heartbreaking. I love Eye of the World Rand. I can't help but root for him with his determination and heart. And he reaches this resolution in his journey, this goal that he has, that he wants to get back with Moraine. But once he finds out why he's being hunted, it's almost beside the point, because his nightmare has just begun. These 4 chapters, along with everything else that they are an incredibly tragic testament to Rand and Matt's friendship. Because we get to experience it, and Rand experiences it, but Matt might as well not, because he doesn't remember it. Moraine wards off the dagger when she gets to the Queen's Blessing, and Matt comes downstairs and says everything is blurry after Whitebridge. And once he's healed of the dagger, his memories are so spotty and hazy, his memories of his entire life. He has vague memories from the trip of the Tower of Genji, Elsa Grinwell. He has memories of Millie Skane, parts of Camelin, but so much is gone, and a lot of those memories only come to him when he sees them. He also wakes up in Tar Valon with memories of things that never actually happened. so much of his life is just gone. And one of the things that's gone is all of these moments between him and Rand, these bonds that people who fight together and have traumatic experiences together develop. They went through something so difficult and took care of each other, and it was really special. Matt might not remember it, but I think it made a powerful emotional impression on him. His mind may not retain anything, but his heart remembers, and it's imprinted upon Rand. People say that Matt acted like a piece of shit when he found out that Rand could channel, and he did. But before he found out, Rand tried to drive Matt and Perrin away in Valdara, and he sort of succeeded. Perrin is forgiving enough that when Rand apologized to him, he would have let it go if Matt hadn't kept fueling the grudge. Matt may not remember what happened between Whitebridge and Caemlyn, but Rand was such a loving friend that it had a powerful impact on how he felt about Rand. When Rand tells him to fuck off, it's so deeply out of character. I think it broke something in Matt. Because he doesn't remember, he can't even process it by saying to himself, like, that night in the bushes when Rand held me while I cried meant so much, and it was devastating to hear him say he didn't want me to go with him. That rejection has me so hurt and angry I almost can't forgive him. It makes it impossible for him to heal from Rand lashing out in that way. Not that Matt is self-aware enough to process anything, even if he did remember, but, you know. For him it was just a sudden and emphatic slap out of nowhere that had the kind of cruel, emotional, gut-punching impression like you give to a child who can't understand, or an animal, something that can't understand but feels that betrayal. Matt can't remember and doesn't understand why he feels so emotionally attached to Rand and subsequently so rejected, but what Rand did when he told him and Perrin to fuck off was so bruising and upsetting that even when he apologizes, it didn't really help. For Matt, it was like, this person is so utterly different. He's talking this bullshit about being a lord, and he's wearing these clothes, and he's been acting so strange. And then when he finds out he can channel, he has a reason behind all of this, and it's like, this dude is already crazy. This person is not the same. He is not the same, and what we have is no more. That doesn't mean that Matt being a shit about Rand channeling is okay, but Matt lacks self-awareness. He keeps the dagger separate from himself. He doesn't think of himself as dirty or tainted the way Perrin does with the wolves. Perrin can identify with Rand, and when he learns he can channel, he finds himself wanting to tell him about the wolves, to let him know he understands and that he felt dirty and bad when he learned what he could do, and he knows what it's like to hurt someone because of something. So he can't not see Rand as still his friend, even while Rand changes, because Perrin has changed too. Whereas Matt doesn't know who Rand is anymore, and Matt isn't self-reflective enough to consider the ways in which he himself is dirty. He doesn't consider the ways he's similar to Rand, and so in his eyes the Rand who is his friend is no longer real. And that doesn't excuse his behavior. He's a petty little shit, and his actions toward Rand are unnecessary and just redundantly unkind. But thinking about him like a wounded child who can't understand and needed to seize on a reason why and say to himself, this person isn't who he once was, and we can't be friends now because it isn't the same. I can understand that, even if I can't relate, because I'm more mature and more self-aware and better at self-reflection. Matt is not one of the characters that anyone has great expectations for as far as personal growth. He has strengths, but that's not one of them. And so his and Rand's friendship is never more than a dream after, because some things can't be fixed. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I really enjoy doing these explorations of relationships between the characters, and I'm looking forward to doing a whole bunch more of those. You can find me on Twitter at WarderGray, that's Gray with an E. Check out Watt Trivia and Games. They've got a Discord and a Twitter at Trivia Watt. You can click on the link there for the Discord. You can come and join some of the trivia teams, play in a bunch of different games. There's a bunch of great people in that community, and there's a hub for a whole bunch of Wheel of Time content creators, so you should definitely come and check it out. Podcast of the Dragon does not have its own Discord at this time, but because I am High Inquisitor at the Watt Trivia and Games, I have my own channel there for Podcast of the Dragon. So if you want to come and talk to me and interact, go ahead and join the Watt Trivia and Games Discord and check it out. If you don't want to join the Discord but you'd still like to talk to me, you can email me at podcastofthedragon@gmail.com. Love to hear from you, get questions, constructive criticism, ideas for future episodes, whatever you like. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. I'm the Grey Warder, and I too love to hold hands and take long walks in the rain.